how did we get here in the first place? Russia's been making that case for years, and the West and Europe just don't want to hear anything. To them, the world, this conflict began on February 25th, 2022, and there's no discussion about anything that preceded that. But more than Maidan, what's important was what happened after Maidan. People talk about NATO expansion. People talk about the coup, the U.S.-backed coup with Victoria Nuland and the U.S. Embassy and Jeffrey Pyatt running point on that operation. They talk about what happened in Maidan, the false flag. But more important than all that is the fact that there was an international accord with multiple countries, with 2 NATO members and European countries as guarantors, the Minsk Accords, which was then codified into a UN Security Resolution 2202. And this is a unanimous decision by the UN Security Council. So everybody was supposedly on board with this, and Russia set up the Minsk Contact Group, which was constantly had its door open, its phone lines open the whole time. And in fact, having spoke to them myself when I was in Moscow, they still have their doors open. They still have kept their phone lines open. They've never closed down the Minsk Contact Group, and they've always kept that dialogue open. And you're so right, Danny. Those would have been, albeit autonomous regions, would have stayed within the Ukrainian fold. So, I mean, but Luhansk is so significant because what Poroshenko did, what the Ukrainians did at the behest of the United States was to enact a policy called lustration. That was to basically declare Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea, or these places, as persona non grata, because they didn't accept a new coup government, which was unconstitutional, and the fact that they were discriminating against Russian speakers and the Russian language and so forth. So this is not a trivial thing. This is huge. And so they cut them out. They deployed the military against their own people. Again, you know, Zelensky says this is Ukrainian territory, but he deploys the military and shells what he claims is his own people. You can't have it both ways, and that's the problem with Zelensky, the United States, and the NATO narrative, is they want it both ways. And there's a series of events.
There was overnight some significant attacks into Donetsk area by Ukraine, apparently using cruise missiles, not just drones, which had some pretty significant civilian casualties in some of the areas where, at least as far as I'm aware, there actually aren't any military sites. But of course, that never gets covered in the West, unlike everything that ever happens by the Russian side in the other Ukraine territory. But as you point out, this is Ukrainian territory, and those were, at least ostensibly, Ukrainian civilians that were being shelled by the Ukrainian military. Unfortunately, that doesn't ever get brought up enough, I don't think.
No. And the other thing that's important is the logistical lines for Russia into Donetsk. Is very strong, and they have really great infrastructure. They've redone the roads and upgraded all the infrastructure going into Donetsk. So from Rostov and these areas, they're able to supply and service those regions really strongly. Now that Luhansk is secure, they can sort of carry on with that process in Luhansk. So what you have is a completely different level of infrastructure, of roads, of supply lines on those regions. And if you cross into Ukrainian territory, you see the quality drop significantly. So there's already a pronounced difference between what is under Russian control visually and what is under Ukrainian control. And you'll see this going forward with each sort of area, town, city, or region that comes under Russian control over time. And that makes a big difference to the people living there.
Right.
And it strengthens the Russian case to the people.
It does. One of the other things that Zelensky said in that clip we just showed was that he was dogging because he said Russia doesn't even want to end the war. They just want to keep fighting. But if you listen to what Vladimir Putin himself says, you get a different story.
I deeply respect the current American president. As for what he's doing within the country, within the United States, or when it comes to the Middle East and his efforts there, to achieve peace, for example, in the Ukraine crisis, we value that a lot. And let me say that publicly again, like I've said before, President Trump, I believe, sincerely wants to achieve peace in Ukraine. Just recently, he said it's more difficult than he had believed before. Well, that's true, and it's to be expected, because it's one thing when you look at something from the outside, and it's something different when you actually deal with it. And the same goes for the Middle Eastern matter. But it's difficult there as well, because real life is always difficult. It's more difficult than what you initially believe. But personally, I'm always open to any contacts, to any meetings. And I know that President Trump has said on multiple occasions that we could meet. But I personally think this is something you need to prepare for, because as a result of such a meeting, we need to achieve some kind of new level of partnership.
And so you see that Putin is saying, yeah, we want to have a dialogue. We want to have an end to this. But if they don't get it, then there's very clearly one alternative that Russia's going to have, and that's going to continue to meet the military means on the ground. I'll talk about that in a second. But first of all, let's just take a look at the two leaders here. You have Zelensky on the one hand, mocking the Russian side and claiming that there's no diplomacy, when that's all Russia has ever tried to do is reach a diplomatic end all the way through this, certainly before and to this current day here. But yet you have Zelensky, on the other hand, acting as though he's in the superior position. But the conflict or the content on the ground is not working in his favor. So one would reasonably ask, and I am of you, if Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, and now we have this latest physical loss here, Russia's winning, then why would the guy who's losing mock the guy who's winning but keep fighting?
They have been. Ukraine has been losing consistently and steadily for quite some time, over a year, I would say, well over a year and a half, ever since Bakhmut. So what you have is periodically, anytime there's any potential, impasse or any potential pause or chance to negotiate, you have some extravagant, incursion attacks, surprise attack into the Russian region, into Kursk, into Belgorod, some daring, valiant, raid or whatever, Krinky, or all these different operations, or the one just recently, right before the Istanbul talks were supposed to take place, hitting all the Russian long-range nuclear deterrents, and then that blows up in the Western media, and then Zelensky puffs his chest out, goes on a fundraising tour, and it's just they've been repeating, rinse and repeat this cycle over and over again. And so I have to think for him, this is a good formula, because it's kept him in power when he really should have been out of power a while ago and replaced with somebody else that might be able to bring this thing to some kind of a real negotiated settlement, political settlement. But he'll keep going, and Europe and the West are quite happy to keep him in there. They're really stuck. They're really dug in. So he is the money man. He's the guy that can bring the cash, bring the weapons from the West, and so he's placated the far right in Ukraine. So it's a disaster politically, democratically. Ukraine is a basket case. So this is all you've got. He'll keep going, Danny. He'll keep going as long as they're going to fuel this PR cycle in the West and politically and keep it going. It looks like Trump's keeping it going. If you look at where Trump was in January, end of January, when he came in, and where he is now, look at the actual act. Don't listen to what Trump says. Listen to what he does.
Well, they need him for defense. I mean, I don't want to see people killed, and they're going to need him for defense. They're amazingly effective. They're going to need something because they're being hit pretty hard.
Are you going to send them, though? Are you going to send more?
Yeah, we might. We're looking at it.